Welcome to Capes, Cows and Masks, the show where we uncover the world of soups and science fiction. And today we're going to be doing a full season review of Invincible Season 1, the latest animated TV series from Amazon Prime, based upon the comic series by Robert Kirkman and Cory Walker, and Robert Kirkman also being the creator of the TV show. I'm your host, Jake Hart. I'm a podcaster, sound designer, and a writer for Fresh Take Hub, and today I'm joined by my fellow co-host.
Hello, I'm David Oscar. I am editor over on freshtakehub.com. I'm a content creator and writer and fellow podcaster.
Great stuff. And also joining us, we had to get a guest that had read and was immersed in the comics of Invincible, and we had such a great time with him doing the Falcon and the Winter Soldier review show. Please welcome back film journalist and writer Stefanos Florakis. How you doing, Stefanos?
I'm good, and I'm really trying not to spoil anything. It's been really, really hard. A lot of people have been watching this, and none of them have read the comics. So I'm just sitting in the corner, just whispering to all myself.
Yeah, I've been chatting to you throughout as this series was airing, and you were just like, just wait. And I was like, no, Steph, stop saying these things. Like, what's going to happen? So I figured, because you had read the entire 144 issues, have you?
Yeah, to be fair, it was one summer. It was a long summer. I had nothing to do. Though, if I remember right, I think we didn't have any major films coming out, or that I wasn't excited for. And I was like, fuck it. I'm just going to read all these issues because why not?
So you had read them already after the run had finished, so you came sort of late to the game of the comics?
Yeah, like I think we were on the final couple of issues yet. And I just, to be fair, I wasn't like obsessed with them. I find it just interesting, very much like how many our fans right now find the show interesting. It was the same for me. And then up to a point, I caught up, and then I was just waited for the two final issues to come out.
Oh, nice. How about you, Dave? Were you familiar or heard of the character Invincible in this comic series before the show was announced?
No, I think the sort of costume I had maybe seen before, so possibly when I've been into like comic book shops or looked at certain books or pop culture stuff, then maybe I'd come across the image of the character. That kind of blue, yellow and black kind of seemed familiar, but apart from that, this was pretty much completely new to me. And yeah, especially when it was advertised on Amazon, it was very much like, oh cool, this animated superhero show. There was no sort of like, oh right, they're adapting that. It was quite a new concept to me. So yeah, it was certainly more appealing and more interesting from just how new it was, but also interesting not knowing anything about it. I suppose there was that kind of early boys comparison even from the beginning, because one is from Amazon, and two, we already sort of knew it was like going to be violent and that kind of stuff. So there was already those early conceptions about the show before watching it as well.
Yeah, I think I'm on a similar thing to you, Dave, where I wasn't really aware of this character. I think I had seen images of him or something in comic book shops or online and stuff like that. But my first actual real introduction to him when it was Seth Rogen was announced to be doing an Invincible movie, and Robert Kirkman has confirmed that is still going ahead. They're still doing that. So I was like, oh, what? So Seth Rogen's doing this comic book movie. I had already seen what he's done with, Preacher. Really enjoyed what he did with that and with The Boys. So I was like, well, let's have a look who this character is. So I had a look a bit at, did a bit of research, and I thought, oh, this is interesting, but never actually read the comics. And then seeing this, the trailer for this and Amazon announcing they were going to do this, I was like, oh, okay. I think I'll probably wait for the show then before I dive into the comics. But Steph, what was your first reactions when you'd heard that Amazon were going to be adapting this comic book series into an animated show?
No, animated show made more sense than a film, because I think you all kind of realized what the kind of narrative is in the comics, because it's very similar to the show. And although it would be kind of possible, but you will have to cut out a lot of the best elements, by my opinion. Like if you would have taken what we've seen so far, you made into a film, we wouldn't see the Martians or Titan or the whole fight in that episode with Titan. That wouldn't be in it because there would be no way. And also a lot of the secondary characters who later on become very vital, they will have to be cut down to less than supporting. So I was glad that though it did pick up to a show, but as for the film, I have no idea where they could go, especially now that the show is becoming very popular. It's almost like you would take Game of Thrones and you finish the first season, you're preparing for the next two seasons, but at the same time, you'd be told that they're going to make a film about the books. It, and in both cases, I don't see how that could be possible unless if it is almost like an addition to the or existing world, like being like a completely different story and like a major event, and then going into the show again, just like what Marvel is doing with the shows and films.
Yeah, that's a really good point because after seeing this show, I was pretty much like you thinking, how could you cut all this out to fit into a 2-hour movie now? Because I'm so attached to all these characters and these different story threads that a movie would not do it justice. And we've spoken about on the show before that, in a way, television, whether that be live action or animated, tends to lean to better storytelling for superheroes and comic books because comic books themselves are serialized storytelling. The MCU sort of got away with that because they've just made a giant TV show. It is basically a giant TV show. But you've seen with the success of The Boys, Watchmen, the Marvel Netflix stuff, that TV has been a really booming industry now for comic book storytelling and how you can tell it. So Dave, what was sort of your thoughts going into this series? Obviously we had praised The Boys so much last year and how good that was. What did you think of a similar direction but in animated form?
Yeah, well, I think to continue the point of like how series compared to film, especially with comic book content, I think where Marvel and even DC do benefit as well is that they're dealing with like an entire legacy of a character, and it's not often that they're they say we are going to like tackle this very specific run and we're going to tell it like start to end. It'll always be very much a light adaptation, and they'll mix in different elements. So Ragnarok is a classic example of just taking several different storylines, but at the end of the day, they usually go into the film with kind of an original concept almost, like especially like Civil War, that doesn't really reflect anything of what the original comic book is like. So I think that that's where they can benefit. But when you look at things like The Boys and Umbrella Academy, etc., that's where you do want to have those seasons to be able to tell the stories as they appear in the comic books, because as we've said, they are kind of episodic, serialized within their original form already. So yeah, I think for me as like an animation fan and somebody who's enjoyed like animated television, I was really excited for the concept. Again, some more adult animation, getting to see superheroes have an animated series, which I think is really great, especially because so much of it has been lined up with children's television for a long time. And I think that sometimes that does give them a lot of advantages and a lot of unique aspects because you're catering to a wider audience. And it means when you're telling like darker themes and stuff like that, it's more commendable because it's aimed at children. But also there is the side which which thinks, no, we do want to have animated shows which are catered to adults and aren't just comedies as well. And I think that was what was interesting for me going in, especially when you look at things like what, I think anime is probably the big exception. But when you look at what Netflix is doing, for example, even though they do have their own animes, and in some ways you could possibly consider some of their series like Castlevania, etc., kind of like anime-like as well. Those are very much adult-orientated, they're very violent, etc., but they're still, they have some very good animation, but at times they do cut a lot of corners, and there are still a lot of the stereotypical kind of tropes you see with budget animation or animated television in terms of like characters just standing still and, just sliding across the screen and that kind of stuff. So I think this was also an opportunity to go, well, this is a big streaming service with a lot of money behind it. And from what we can see in the trailers, it looks like they're willing to put the money into the animation as well. And I think that was interesting how that translated and came through in the final product as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you, I was really looking forward to seeing a new superhero animated show because I felt we've been slightly lacking of on recently. The big focus has been on live action. And, our generation, we grew up with, of course it's our generation, so we're going to say it's the best generation of animation. But, especially for superhero content, Batman the Animated Series, Justice League, Superman, all the DC stuff, and then going into, the early noughties with, as we spoke about in the Mandalorians, with Clone Wars, Tartakovsky, Cartoon Network, that whole era of animation was just fantastic. So it's really interesting to see that the kids now of that generation, us, we're all grown up now, we're all making the stuff that we sort of are influenced by. So I'm perfectly okay with seeing more adult-oriented animation because the kids who like this type of animation are adults now. So it makes kind of sense. And I also think with the superhero landscape, a lot of it still is, targeted towards family-friendly audiences, which is fine. We've talked about ad nausea about the differences, what can be for children and what can be for adults. But I still think in the animation game, there is so much room to explore adult content within the superhero genre because, yes, like you said, Dave, we're getting a lot of boom now with stuff like Rick and Morty, Solar Opposites, but it's all comedy based. Like I want to see some action, some drama, and some I'll just say it, some outright blood and guts sometimes. It's just entertaining to see that in animated form, and especially when you give it the time and day, as I think Amazon have. They've given it a lot of time, a lot of love, and a lot of money, it seems, to get this right. So I'm really, really impressed.
Were you nervous?
A little.
But you caught it.
I did.
Being a superhero is no different. This is the beginning of a long journey for you and me. Along the way, you're going to need to do things you don't want to do or might not think you can do. It's okay to be scared. It's natural to doubt yourself. But if you can push through that and do what needs to be done, you'll do just fine. You think you can do that, Mark?
Yeah.
We'll start off with our sort of overall thoughts of the entire show. Steph, I'll start with you. You being the most knowledgeable about this world.
Yeah, and that is, to be honest, I think it's been kind of an issue. Because when you're familiar with the source material, you kind of stop thinking as a film or television critic, because you kind of miss that spontaneity that you probably guys have. And I know that each one of you kind of have some very opposite opinions about the show. And I'm kind of staying in the middle, because for one, I'm excited to see what I've read on screen, but the other one, I don't know how objective I can be with what I'm seeing, because there are some elements which I think for other people, and I think also for David, will also say later on, it's the fact that they don't know why we're seeing this. I know why we're seeing this. I know where this is going to lead, but I don't know if I would have felt the same way if I didn't know. So beyond that, if I talk about technical things, I can say that the writing's really good. I think part of me really wants to see a script of this, because I think the dialogue are very well put and the characters very well made. And there are some small changes, which I am a big fan, which we're going to talk about later on when we talk about characters. But overall, I am very positive with it. I know what's going to come afterwards, but I am excited for it. It's not like The Walking Dead, which after a while, even though I knew what was coming, I was kind of dreading for it. This is more or less, I am excited for what is coming, but I'm very curious to how they're going to take it and how people will react. Because I'm not going to spoil anything, but some crazy shit is about to happen. and a lot of morality will shift. So, and I have no idea how the TV audience will react to it.
Interesting thoughts. I've always been thinking like that with a lot of these rated R superhero shows like Preacher and The Boys, because I was familiar with those comics. Going into those shows, I was like, how are they going to pull this off in live action? So, but the animation gives you so much more freedom. But it's interesting that you mentioned you've got that baggage of these comics going into it, so you do have a sort of bias towards it. But Dave, you having no knowledge of this world whatsoever, what were your overall thoughts of the show?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to put like an overall thoughts on it in some ways, and especially knowing that I'm sort of in a minority of people, of mainly the people I've seen talking about this show, absolutely love it. And I don't know, a lot of it for me is that, don't get me wrong, and throughout this review, I think this will be the case, is that like, I think this is really good, and I've gone back week to week. At the end of the day, I wasn't even just because of this review that I stuck with it. I wasn't, I've watched plenty of, or started to watch plenty of series in the past, Netflix originals, etc., where I'm like, I can't do this anymore, just give up. So I was never at that stage. I think that, I enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. But overall, I think it's just, it didn't always quite gel with me. I never finished every episode going, wow, I absolutely loved that. I didn't think it ticked all the boxes for me. It wasn't my jam in a lot of ways. There were things that were, but they weren't bigging up the elements that I enjoyed the most, and just the way the story is in general. And I think that's why when I think of something like other superhero properties that I have problems with, so if we look at some like the DC stuff, for example, a lot of that can come down to taste, especially with like Zack Snyder, as we've discussed before. But I think it comes down to kind of like that Justice League versus like Man of Steel kind of element that we've had before, in which Man of Steel to me is still kind of, I watch it like, well, even if this isn't my kind of jam in terms of like the type of story they're going for, I still have major problems in terms of the actual structure, the story, the character, the actual technical elements of it. Whereas something like Justice League, I don't have any sort of like technical issues. Again, it's just a taste thing. So it's kind of the same here sometimes. I think that I'm like, yeah, you're doing all this well. You're fleshing out your characters really well. You're sort of developing your story really well. But a lot of my problems just come from in some ways, just the original concept of the way things are in the first place, and just the entire ideas of certain things, which I don't quite like, and I just think hinder the show. So a lot of my problems just stem from just the concept in general, in which I'm like, I don't know why you would go with this, because I don't know why you're doing it. It doesn't add anything to the story, and it's holding back your story and the uniqueness of the show in some ways for me. So as much as I enjoyed it, like I said, I think also the running time is a big thing I didn't mention with adult animation. It's great to have something that runs at like 45 minutes, whereas we're always used to just animated shows being like 20 minutes to 30. So I think it's great that you got that. I think like the music is great in it. I love some of the voice cast. That is a big issue I have with this, and I'll get onto that, is I think that the voice cast is distracting as all hell sometimes. And I think that that's a massive problem for the show. But again, I can't deny that, like I said, some of the stuff in there is so shocking, so fun sometimes. A lot of the action is really crazy. But again, it's always just a 50-50 with me with this series. It's just certain, sometimes I'm loving the action. Sometimes I'm like, this has gone too far, or I don't know why you're doing this. So it's going to be an interesting discussion.
You're insane. Okay, regarding like the voice cast, you're insane. But we'll get into the characters and voice cast.
Jacob's politely nodding, like, yes. I am disagreeing vehemently in my mind.
No, like the other, I can get behind some of the other stuff you might bring up, but the voice cast, I will die on that hill, Dave. I mean, judging how I came out of Dave there, you're probably going to assume that I love this show, and yes, this show is absolutely outstanding. Like, they just nailed it. Like, in overall style and tone, is just incredible. And getting down to like specific scenes and panels, like I haven't read the comics, but judging from the people who have, like I've spoken to online and stuff, they say it's like one of the most faithful comic book adaptations ever. And it also seems that, much like they did with The Boys, they're just changing different story elements here and there. But as Steph mentioned, the changes are actually improving upon the comics, and I really like when an adaptation can do that. Like, it's completely unlike any family-friendly PG-13 content we typically associate with superheroes, and I just think it delivers on a level of action, comedy, and themes that I found delightful. And it is incredibly dark at times, and there's really, really brutal violence, but that is not I don't think that should be mistaken for like immaturity or a lack of like going towards a certain tone of stuff, because I think every brutal death is treated as an absolute shock, and it works for the narrative. Like, you feel every punch, you taste every blood splatter, like every single element of the violence and action is just adding to the narrative role. And it's also just within that, it's still a family drama and / comedy that just happens to feature superheroes. And for me, that's what I kept on going back to the show. It wasn't the violence, it wasn't the superhero epicness, it was the family drama going on between our main leads, and also Mark's, life as a teenager, because I'm a sucker for, like coming of age stories. The voice cast is incredible, everyone's bringing their A game, and I just love that these episodes are 45 minutes long. Like, normally, as you mentioned, Dave, animated series are like 20, 25, 30 minutes max for episodes. And they tend to be really, plot-driven, because you're trying to fit all the action scenes and stuff with involved. So you don't get a lot of time. And you're lucky if you get one moment where there's like a really quiet character scene, because most of the time you're really driving towards when's the next action scene, what's the bad guy doing, etc. So the fact that these 45-minute episodes means you're getting a ton of superhero action, but you're also getting these really quiet and beautiful character moments that's really refreshing within the superhero animation game. So, like Steph as well, I think the writing is top-notch. I really appreciate that Robert Kirkman wrote the first and last episodes, and from the other episodes, he's clearly set up a really, really good writing team. So this might be a boring review for some people from my end, but I have very little negatives to say about this show. This is two chef's kiss from me. Like, this is fucking incredible. I love it.
I mean, I do need to say that I don't think it's a comedy. It is a satire, but it's not really a comedy. Because I literally, I was searching right now and seeing what does IMDb state, what kind of genre states, and I'm very happy they don't say it's a comedy, because it doesn't have the same bits. It is a satire. It's a satire of the genre itself. But and yeah, like you guys said, I'm actually very happy that they're going with a more serious route, because for one, it would be a huge dishonest to the comics. But I also understand what David says, that there are some elements in there which they obviously are a direct reference to pre-existing material, like the Guardians of the Globe, for instance, which they are obviously an amalgamation of Justice League and the Avengers, but they also my issue back then with the comics. Although back then I thought I was an aged teenager, but in reality I was just a savage loser, like everyone else. Which I started realizing, well, yeah, why did they make it like that? Why is War Woman basically Wonder Woman? What was the point of that? That is still something I still don't know. Why? Because these characters on their own, they're very interesting, and don't think they need to be a direct reference. And especially someone like the Immortal, which we're going to talk, I hope later on, is a very interesting character because of the background and his solo origin story. And I've seen a lot of people now online comparing him to, the Captain America of the group or the Thor of the group, which I'm like, no, he's the Immortal. He's his own thing. Out of all of them, he's probably the most original. But yeah, like, I do see both views, because there are some issues which I do have, but I don't particularly think they're that big. but I kind of wish they had given more time and more story to them. Because I really liked the final episode, the biggest, longest mid credit scene where we see like kind of each guardian in their own environment, which that gave a lot of substance and character to each one of them, and then in the end, just fucking die. But which is, it's great for the new people because that kind of shows what this story is. But I wish we had more. Like I wish we had the first episode. We had a bit more of the Guardians because I do think they could have done a lot more to each one of them.
Yeah, I think a lot of that stuff will come down to my character stuff, but I think also what was interesting that both you guys have mentioned, especially Steph, because he's read them, but also one of Jake's like positives as well of like, you know, loving it as a very faithful adaptation. That was what was interesting as well, is that sometimes I was watching this thinking, I can imagine this does work well as a comic, but I just wasn't sure they worked so well as the visual medium. And I think what makes it more confusing, well, not so like confusing, but is that often because it's animation, it literally is like the comic book has come to life. So I think that's where it's harder then to get that disconnect. So sometimes I did feel like I was just reading a comic or watching comic panels, which is not so much a bad thing, but I just feel that there's certain elements of like television and film which usually and quite often will adapt or change things from comic book properties or for film and television because they're like, oh, this wouldn't work in that medium. And I think that we've not really had this situation that much before because, again, there's not been many animated shows which have kind of gone so faithful to like a certain series or comic book. So I did feel like a lot of the times I was like reading a comic book and seeing stuff that I thought this would work well in a comic book because I would be looking at it and it would sort of be giving me the story visually in a lot of different ways. It's just something different about the experience, about reading something, seeing it. Whereas I don't think that this like elevated or changed anything. Whereas if you were watching it, say, like The Boys, you look at Homelander in the comics compared to how he looks visually in both mediums, and he looks quite different because obviously you just can't replicate that costume in live action. And I think that that's the difference here, is because they can so faithfully adapt what they're doing, there's no change in the way you perceive things. So for comic book fans like Steph, maybe it's harder to disconnect that because he's not going to go, well, I don't like the way you adapted that, or I don't like the way you didn't adapt that, because he's literally seeing the exact same thing. So he's not seeing it in any new way or form. And I think that was what was the struggle for me sometimes, is I was watching it thinking, well, I don't really see how you've changed anything or made it into a new format. It just feels like the comic book format. It doesn't seem like it's been adapted to work specifically as a television program, which again, I think the writers of Umbrella Academy and The Boys have done quite well before.
I disagree, Dave. I highly disagree. I feel as if this is the comic book coming to life, and yes, it is taking a lot of panels and, you know, the costumes and everything straight out of the comics, but there's something about seeing it, you know, visually moving. The superheroes flying, the superheroes throwing punches, you know, them just, you know, moving from getting up from a seat to move somewhere else, like at the sound design, the music and everything. There is something about seeing that brought to life in an animation form. And I was actually thinking, as watching this show, apart from the comics, because obviously that's where they were born, I genuinely think that animation might be the best medium for comic book and superhero storytelling, because the possibilities are just endless with what they can do. And I was just floored by some of the animation, some of like the flight sequences and the action sequences that was just like, you could never do this in live action. And that's what's the joy of animation, is that it can bring stuff from the comics that you think, wow, I wish I could see this live action, but it's never going to happen. They can do that with animation, and that's what I really appreciate about it as well. And I think, again, I haven't read the comics, but judging from what the people have said, and Steph, they've changed enough elements within the story that it works for a television program, in my opinion anyway. Part of the charm of the show for me is that there's so many apocalyptic threats happening on like a regular basis, and it just sort of feels routine. I love that you just get a bunch of superheroes show up and a bunch of supervillains show up. You don't really know who these are. They just kind of there, stand there and look cool. But they're there to use for narratively for Mark's story. Like in that episode where they take him down, that is meant to show Mark that he's so out of his game when he thinks he's meant to be, you know what I mean? It's meant to show the horror of actually being a superhero, that he struggles a lot. He's meant to struggle throughout this entire series. Very rarely does he actually ever win a fight in this series, which I kind of love. But yeah, I just love that about it. I do think it does require a certain amount of knowledge of comic books, superheroes, and the world and how they work. So that's why I think this is like a great time for this show to come out, because if you had released this 10 years ago, I would probably agree with a lot of what you're saying. But now there's been so many Marvel movies, so many DC movies, there's, superhero shows and movies coming out of our ears. I think the general population is so acquainted now with how the superhero genre works that you can throw them into a world like this and a lot of them can get on board with it. So, I think the world building was done for a lot of the character dynamics rather than going, this is what these people do and they do this and this is that team and stuff like that. So, yeah, that didn't bother me as much. But I think it's the same with The Boys. You have to have a certain understanding of superheroes to fully appreciate The Boys, I think.
Yeah, but I think there's, to me, again, I think without sort of referencing too much like to things like The Boys, but I think that there's certain reasons that they pull that off. And I think you're right. Like I said, I'm not saying that this show completely fails. And a lot of the time I was thinking about it, watching it, going, yes, this takes that investment that we are at the moment, that people would watch this and go, oh, yeah, it's just some rip-off Justice League, cool, because they've seen the Justice League and they've seen the Avengers enough to know those tropes and to just buy into that. But again, it kind of comes into the stuff that Steph was mentioning about before, into the more satire stuff about like why is a certain character a reflection of Wonder Woman? Why are these characters like that? And so I don't want to get too heavily into it here, but again, it's just my problem with the idea of like, why are these characters satires of original characters if there's not actually any point to it? I just don't understand why they are references to these characters if that's not the point of the show, because to me that is the point of The Boys, is that you've got, hey, wouldn't it be funny if like the Aquaman ripoff was just a complete douche and it was funny that like he like speaks to sea life in this way? And wouldn't it be funny if well, not funny, but wouldn't it be interesting if the Wonder Woman equivalent had serious emotional issues and was very disconnected from her relationships and all that kind of stuff? So even though, while I'm not saying I expect to have that within the Guardians of the Globe, there's just so many characters that they throw in here in terms, especially supporting characters for Mark, that I'm like, but why? why are they this way? Why have you decided to go down this route? Again, when Invincible is very much his own character, but just nobody else seems to be. Or very much his own hero, I'll say. Not so much character, that's unfair.
Oh, hey! It's the Iceman!
Rex.
Couldn't have won that fight without you. Oh! Except we did.
They got old and ran away.
Still counts.
Welcome, Invincible. My name is Robot. Apologies for Rexplode. He's
Unbelievably awesome.
incorrigible.
And rude.
And bored of this.
Unduplicate. Invincible. Which one of you do I look at when we talk?
Right, so let's sort of talk about some of the characters and the voice cast. Like, we need to talk about this insane cast, because we've got John Hamm, Zachary Quinto, Sandra Oh, Walter Goggins, Gillian Anderson, Mark Hamill, Seth Rogen, Clancy Brown, and of course, the two leads, J.K. Simmons and Stephen Yeun, and so much more. Steph, I'll start with you. This is just ridiculous, this cast. What did you think of the cast themselves, and then some of your favorite characters?
Huge shout out to Mahershala Ali, so huge. I didn't realize it was him until his episode. I was like, wait, is that Mahershala? Is that Cottonmouth? Is Cottonmouth the King Cottonmouth playing Titan? Is the future Blade being Titan? And I'm like, why is he playing all the cool characters in the comics now. What the hell? Which I'm absolutely fine with it. I have no issue with that. But yeah, no, this is a star cast. I knew about Steven Yeun, Sandra Oh, and J.K. Simmons. I knew that they were going to be in it, which I immediately thought, oh yeah, great casting. Immediately, like this is top notch. The three leads, and I was really excited. But it was only when I started watching the show, and if you watch on Prime when you watch the episode, it says each actor that appears on frame, and I was thinking, wait, Gillian Anderson is Adam Eve? Oh, that's such a brilliant thing to do. And it just continue on and this thing, and like John Hamm is that random security guy. I'm like, why is Don Draper in this? And then I was like, I'm happy that Don Draper is here. Don't get me wrong. It's just everywhere. Each one character, it's an actor that I've known from something. Majority of them are from Walking Dead, which is always good to see. A cast being still together. It's always great. But yeah, like as means of talent, it's there and it's great. As for my favorite characters, I do have specific ones, not necessarily because of the season, but because I know where they're gonna go. But for now, definitely my favorite ones are Titan and Robot / Rudy.
How about yourself, Dave?
Yeah, like I said, at the top, I said that some of this is, my problems with the show. But I think that while, again, animation can be great for voiceover artists specifically, especially when you start to get the regulars show up. So especially Clancy Brown, for example, or Kevin Michael Richardson, they're just sort of staples of animation at this stage. So you kind of just go, yeah, of course. And, that's always fun to
Mark
see.
Hamill.
Yeah, exactly. So, I'm more than happy to see him there. J.K. Simmons has, again, got a history within, even Cartoon Network stuff. Legend of Korra, loved him there. I think he does a fantastic job in this. He adds the exact amount of sort of threat and sort of scariness of Nolan, which I think that you need, without being kind of just like he's playing Fletcher from Whiplash again. He's like playing very much a different kind of character. He's not doing anything that he's done before. Which I think is fantastic. Steven Yeun as Mark Grayson, Invincible, I think is top-notch. That's just perfect. Like, there's never a point in which I just didn't believe the emotion or the intention of what he was playing in those moments. I thought he was fantastic. You could buy into him as a kind of teenager as well, which is also important. Sandra Oh is great as Debbie, I think, because like Stefanos, I think, mentioned to me before that the mother hasn't got as big a role in the comics. So I think that she helped to level that up, which is fantastic. And also has some just really like devastating moments, which the animation helped with as well, especially in that last episode in which, you've got Mark there, like seeing if his mum's okay, she wants food, and she's just like breaking down in the bedroom. Like that was a really sort of like very hard-hitting, realistic scene, which I thought was really nice. Zazie Beetz, I really like as Amber. I think she does a really good job. It's just great to keep seeing her in more and more of these kind of films and TV series. I thought she was great in Deadpool. Gillian Jacobs, I also do like as Atom Eve. Again, it's it's the Brita thing, but sometimes she's one of those actresses in which you're like, I don't know if she's quite right for that or if you've cast her well. But I think she's cast in a good role here. I think that her voice, again, doesn't come across as a kind of like live action actress just shoehorned into this series. I think that she does work for that role and for the character, so I liked her. Zachary Quinto, I'm not sure. I really love Zachary Quinto. I love him, and I've been a fan of him ever since Heroes, where he played Silas. And I think here, this was an example of me watching it going, oh wow, they really were able to get some top-notch actors here, and he really does suit Robot. So I really do like him, but in a way he kind of symbolizes some of my issues with the other performances. Of course, I'm going to like, Mark Hamill. I also want to shout out to Jeffrey Donovan, Machine Head. I just really like that character and the way that he sounds. Just like his attitude was just like really funny to me. I really liked him. But then I have a lot of issues with bringing in characters or actors who especially play a lot of comedic roles in other series. and it just took me out of it so many times. And I probably, my biggest problem is with Jason Mantzoukas.
I knew you were going to
Explode.
say that. I knew
I
it.
hated this. I really didn't like Jason as Rexplode, because I'm a big fan of like Big Mouth, and he's in Close Enough as well. He's done so many animated sitcoms. At this stage, he's kind of becoming one of those actors in which they're like, oh, we're doing an animated sitcom, we have to have Jason in this. So when he's in this series, I just can't take him seriously. And I know that his character isn't the most serious of characters, but to me, it's just when you're watching him in like this like raunchy cartoon show about like preteen teenagers, and then to see him in this, I'm like playing the same role. I think, I know a load of people say, well, why can't he be in other things? Because he's doing the exact same voice. That's the problem. Like J.K. Simmons is playing a different character. He's doing a different role. Jason Mantzoukas is playing Jason Mantzoukas again. And it's just the exact same way he sounds in Big Mouth and in Close Enough. I just really don't like it. I think that it really undermines everything that they're trying to do, because it just makes it corny and cartoony and goofy. It makes it a Cartoon Network show when he's in it. I really don't like him in it, and it kind of like makes the whole name of the character even more stupid. So don't like him at all. Anytime he was in a scene, I was completely taken out of the show. That happens as well with the fact that they've got bloody Justin Roiland in an episode. I was like, oh, come on. You've literally got the Rick and Morty guy in an episode. That was really distracting to me. Ezra Miller, I found, was distracting. That just, again, came across to me as like, let's get this Hollywood actor in a role. I think with Mahershala Ali, etc., I can respect the hell out of that, because like Steph, I was kind of like, oh, is that him? Whereas again, I just felt the Ezra Miller was just there because it's Ezra Miller and he's just kind of putting on this goofy voice. I really just don't feel, I'm like, he's not really a voice actor, and that's the problem. Some of this just kind of screamed DreamWorks, kind of like, oh, let's get this Hollywood actor to play this role. And it's like, but why? They don't even suit the role. And it's like, or you can tell that it's them. And that's the point of voice acting, is you're meant to not know it's them. So, Seth Rogen was really distracting.
Alan the Alien.
Even though I said...
No, come on. He was perfect.
No, maybe for the character, yes. But again, just after all the other people, I was a bit like, oh, this is just adding to this. If it was just him, I could have probably excused it. And like I said, even though as much as I love Clancy Brown, probably more the character is my issue in that circumstance. But again, I just found that was too kind of, I was like, I've heard this from Clancy Brown enough times. Like, what is the purpose of this? Why are we doing this kind of Hellboy reference and spoof? Why are we satirizing that? I just don't understand what the point of it is. It doesn't serve the story apart from to go, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we reference this character? And I'm like, but why? Why are we doing that? But yeah, my main issue is with either the celebrity voices who just don't add anything to it, or the people who are comedic actors or cartoon actors who very much bring that cartoon or comedic performance to the role when it doesn't even warrant it. Especially like said in moments like where you've got Atom Eve is like having a serious breakup with Rexplode and he's like cheated on her, and while Gillian Jacobs is sort of like taking it seriously, I just feel that Jason Mantzoukas isn't. He's just going like, hey, babe, come on, that's just what I'm like. And I'm like, can we please take this seriously? I just find it distracting. I really didn't like him in this series, if you haven't guessed already.
Well, for starters, apologies if I said Gillian Anderson instead of Gillian Jacobs, because apologies. Apologies if I said that.
I think I said that as well, so.
Okay, so, and secondly, how dare you for Damon Darkblood? Although to be fair, just say this, because that was actually one of the changes they made from the comics, because in the comics, Darkblood, he's far more of a joke, to be honest. They don't take him seriously, and even in the end, he kind of like, he's gone away, And then he comes back several issues later after the whole Omni-Man happened. And then he says, I know who did it. It was Omni-Man who killed the Guardians. And then everyone was just laughing at him. So this is a better approach, to be honest, because if you thought that this was pointless to you, believe me, the comic book, it's far worse.
Yeah, I didn't really have a problem with Jason Mantzoukas. I haven't really seen him in much other stuff before. I'm aware of him. I've seen like clips of him and stuff doing his thing, and I've seen like sketch comedy of him and stuff. I've never seen him in like a lot of narrative stuff, like these TV shows that you've mentioned, Dave. So that's probably why it didn't stand out for me. Granted, he was like an asshole throughout the whole thing, but is intentionally, and by the end of the 2 episodes, you're seeing some character progression with him. For my favorite thing, I mean, we've talked about, Rexplode and Alan the Alien a lot, but I want to talk about the trio of the lead, so Mark and his parents, because that is the core of the show. And I think, because I found out that J.K. Simmons, Sandra Oh, and Stephen Yeun were all able to record together for a lot of the scenes, and I do think it really shows within the performances, because you really feel the chemistry and interplay between them. And one scene I like to highlight, which I was just like, oh my God, well, this is awesome, is that it's the moment where you have Debbie dealing with her superpowered child. When he says, make me, and then she says, oh, do you feel tough now that you've got all these powers? And I feel as if it's really interesting that we're touching on a lot of this type of stuff that we haven't really seen in superhero film or TV, when a parent has to deal with a superpowered child like this. Like the whole idea of, absolute power corrupting absolutely is awesome. And watching Stephen Yeun and Sandra Oh go back and forth in that scene, I was just like, wow, this is such an interesting dynamic. And seeing how the whole idea of dealing with a child that could possibly throw you into space. So I got a big praise to Sandra Oh, because I think Debbie is probably the MVP of the series for me, and I do like that they beefed up her role. I haven't read the comics, but what they've said, that they've really beefed up her role in this, and to be that really powerful anchor for Mark. And again, that scene that you mentioned, Dave, where he goes up and she's crying there, I'm just like, this is so real as well. Like, even though there's a lot of superheroes involved in here, this is what kept me going back to the show. It's this family dynamic, the real issues that families go through, what a teenager goes through, going through puberty and all that sort of stuff in coming of age stories. I just love all that stuff. And I thought the core of the show, say what you want about some of the subplots, because even I will say throughout the middle of the series, some of the subplots were not as interesting for me as the main stuff. I think the focus on the trio of characters, the leads, was hugely successful, and I felt every bit of emotion going to the finale, and that finale just had me in balls, man. I also think, as well, as I mentioned up top, and you mentioned, Dave, with these 45 minutes episodes, again, if you had 20-minute, 25-minute animated episodes, this is one of the stuff that does not appear in those episodes, because it doesn't really drive the plot forward. It just adds character, and unfortunately in animated shows, you got to cut a lot of that stuff out to get the plot going. Got to commend them for committing for these 45 to 50-minute episodes, because it's stuff like this, man. I love it.
Yeah, and one of the best things they did in the show, the comic books, is that they give the human characters far more to deal with. Because especially like we said about Debbie, which she actually sees the MVP in all this, to what she has to deal with and how she actually acts, and which actually gives far more depth than she does in the comic books. In the comic books, it's far more like the wife, the mother, and it's more than that kind of, just not a pun, but two-dimensional character. And I do like that they kind of make her into a lead. But also another character, a human character who benefits in the show, is Amber, because again in the comic books is again the love interest. Like, she doesn't even learn Mark's identity as Invincible, like way later on when they go to college, and that's the moment we start realizing, oh, they're doing some shifts with some characters, and especially with the final episode, which basically the two of them get back together. That's starting realizing, okay, they're gonna keep Amber for a while, because in the comic books at this point, we wouldn't have seen her until season 3. So they're making the creative choice of making her far more important, and also makes sense because the whole thing about Mark in the fight with Nolan was that he's not gonna betray his own world, his own people, and so it makes sense that he would continue having relationships with vital humans in his life. And I want to say, really want to say what's happening afterwards, because if what I think is going to happen based on the comics, I think it will benefit a lot more to what they're approaching this time around.
That's what's interesting about the fact that you said that like all of this happens over so many issues. I think that's where some of my problems are as well, is that you look at something like Game of Thrones, for example, which focuses on like the Stark children. Well, obviously they set up several, the families, but they give you your sort of lead characters. And then as the series goes on, you start to follow characters like Brienne a bit more, and you follow some of the side characters and go off on these different adventures. So here, I felt that again, it's very much like a comic book series in which you would understand if you were going off on these tangents with Robot and the team, Team Teen, etc., and the Mauler twins. Like they spend so much time with the Mauler twins, and I was there watching it, kind of like, why are we doing this? That's where I found it weird that we kept then going to like Teen and setting up the new Guardians and focusing, having scenes solely with them, and I'm just like, why do I care about these guys at this stage again? Because I haven't really been told anything about them.
You'll see.
I understand like that they're building up to something, but I just mean about like, why should I care about them? Because you haven't told me anything about them. We haven't had, like I said, with Game of Thrones, you haven't seen Brienne of Tarth build up from a secondary character, like a really background character, to then over time she's grown and grown and grown. They didn't do that. They just brought them in straight away and go like, hey, there's all these new characters, like, here's 10 characters, and you're like, okay, like, why am I following them?
I still think throughout the series, though, you do get little moments of unpeeling of who they are. You do have that subplot with Robot, wanting to become human so he can be with Monster Girl. So you get a bit of what his motivation is. You get the Monster Girl, the fact that, every time she changes, she keeps aging younger. I was like, whoa, that's an interesting spin on like the whole monster stuff. So I thought you do get little moments throughout. And yeah, like Steph, like I'm just waiting to see what they do, because especially since they announced seasons 2 and 3, this show looks like it's got a lot of steam. So I'm willing to wait. Like I'm not so, they don't take me out of it, and I do care for them. They but maybe not as much as the leads. But there's enough there for me to go, I'm interested in these characters. Let's see how they're used in the future.
Yeah, it's like I said at the top, I don't think any of this is bad. Like you said, they pull off those, showing the glimmers of character really well. Like the Robot stuff, the Monster Girl, none of it is bad. Like they all do it very well. Again, I just think that there's certain times I'm just like, I think that it just takes away from the Invincible Atom Eve stuff. It's just unfortunate that they want to go with so many side storylines, which are not necessarily bad. They're still good. But I'm just like, I just don't know why you'd want to take away from your main storyline and your main characters in this way. I just think that this would have been better left to a later season, or a season with more episodes.
You should be on my side. We can tear down the old power structure, build a new order. I mean, look at the costume they've got you in. Talk about pandering to gender roles.
I designed my own costume, and I thought your doctorate was in seismology.
Undergrad in sociology and women's studies. I had a minor in African dance. But enough politics!
Right, so the animation style I think we need to talk about. So I believe they use the animation studio Maven, which does all the DC animated movies and stuff like that. And look, we've spoke about it recently on the show of how much we like or maybe dislike some of the DC animated movies. I think most of them are really well done and animated, but I think with Invincible, you can see what happens when you're given a longer production schedule and quite a bit more budget. And I think a lot of the stuff is the details for me. It's the continuity stuff of showing how much blood is on a certain character and how it transitions from the next scene. The exact same marks of blood are still there, or if not, they're getting added through each punch. I think all those little details are incredible. Those are the type of shortcuts that most animation studios look for when they're making these type of shows. In the end of episode 7, when Immortal's like gouging out Omni-Man's eyes, the whole episode of episode 8, he's still got those eyes. You know, it's not because of he's angry. It's because he's had his eyes gouged out. And the fact that they keep on making it worse with his anger, I'm just that attention to detail is just incredible. I just love it so much. So it's the attention to detail and also just the action and the acting, I think, is the two big things you can see the improvement of animation. Like, you see all these big spectacle, the camera work's going everywhere, all the animations being laid out for these big moments, but then you can also have quiet moments between two characters. And for me, I can really see the subtlety of the acting, especially as we mentioned before with the trio of J.K. Simmons, Sandro, and Stephen Yeun. And I do like that they brought in Cory Walker, who was the original artist for the comic books. Probably, you know, you guys have some reservations against this because we were just talking about you should change some designs from the comics to fit, you know, a TV show or a film. But it looks like they were fully committing to the comics by bringing in Cory Walker to do slight redesigns for the TV show, but still honoring the comics. But Dave, what do you think of the animation style they used here? It's very, for me, reminiscent of the DC stuff because it is made by the same studio. But at the same time, for me, it's achieving heights and levels that we don't see in Western animation. Stuff we only really see in Japanese animation, you know, anime with some of the action and stuff like that. But yeah, what did you think?
Yeah, well, I think in some ways like, it's quite similar to like something like Avatar, Legend of Korra in that way of sort of mixing in some of the strengths that you get from animation from, you know, countries like Japan, etc. So yeah, I think it's very similar to the DC stuff in some ways, but on a higher level because even the DC stuff cuts a lot more corners and like you said, wouldn't have the detail that they do in certain action scenes. Especially, like, say, in the first episode, like, I really loved the first flight scene. The music did a lot for that, but also the animation, just, like, you know, that feeling of sort of gliding through the city. And every time, I don't know if it's just the same city, but every time we visit that city, I was always really impressed by the scale of it. You have a lot of animated shows and movies, like the DC ones, where you don't quite get the scale of the city, and you don't really sort of get the feeling of what you have when you're in somewhere like New York or London. Whereas here, I really liked that they focused on like the reflectiveness of like the glass buildings, and it was very much like a blue tone to it. And then when they were in somewhere which was more like a desert sort of place or the forest, there was those kind of different like colors used. So I thought that the animation was really vibrant when they were in somewhere like, you know, the main city, or when something was happening at night. I thought that worked really effectively. I think, like Steph said earlier, there are times where I felt that the designs sort of let them down sometimes, or they were just too simplistic in their approach to certain dialogue moments or certain action scenes. They could sort of like just have, like, I think when like the Martians were invading, for example, sometimes they would just have like Martians just like in a freeze frame and people doing certain things in like stills, which they often do in like anime and stuff. But you can't criticize them too much again for that, because again, it's just the way things are, and that's the way television often works. But I think the biggest thing is, say, like a character like Cecil. I think for me, I was just like, I would like a bit more detail there. I get that he's supposed to be this old, like, scarred man, but because his design was so simplistic, to me, he quite often looked like a sort of flash animation character, like something you'd have like on the internet from years ago. Whereas I think that his design compared to like Nolan, Debbie, Mark, Amber, Eve, all of them looked fantastic, but just some of the more supporting characters could just look sometimes very basic and very like flash animation-y without much detail or anything there. So that was the only time I was sort of like let down a bit. I was just wanting a bit more, especially again if these characters are sort of like parried in for certain characters or meant to be more investable characters. It would have been nice to have something a bit more visually interesting with them. Same with like the Mauler twins. I was like, okay, they're just bulky guys who are blue. I didn't really find that there was much visually interesting with them.
Steph, what did you think of the animation style?
We need more money. we need more money for a lot of stuff. Like everything you guys said about the action sequences, perfect. Like holy shit! Like I was like, I didn't know we were able to do this. In a Western studio in Asia, yeah, every Friday. What are you talking about? But like to see an American show to do action like that, because yeah, because I do actually like the DC animated films, but because they're on VOD, they have very limited budget and time to do them, and it was always a bit disappointing because like how many times I've seen flashpoints and I always wish why we didn't have the full out war in the end, like I'm like money, it makes sense. So in this case I like that whenever they were doing something huge and extreme, they put every creative option in it, like the when Omni-Man went to the different dimension and it basically committed genocide. The whole explosions are happening. It was like it's the shit that I see in Akira, and I always say, "Why don't we do this?" And we saw it, and I'm like, "This is brilliant." Like small stuff like that, but there were some shots in the final fight that I could see they used 3D animation, and I was like, ugh, I can see that. That ain't good. Even though, like, overall, the sequence works, that really put me off. It was specifically when the two of them go to the underground train, and there's this one shot where people just running away from the debris, and you can see that there's 3D figures just turning and just running, and I'm just thinking, dude, there's a reason why we don't play PlayStation 1 anymore, because it looks shit. Don't do that. Why? Especially when you had the brilliant shot of Mark holding the building and you can see the glass breaking through. And I'm like, how do we go from this and we're going to shitty PlayStation 1 figures? Like, anyways, that's just me. And as I said before, the quiet moments, it's not even the quiet moments. I think it's the issue with when the reaction shots, where it's just basically a still frame and just conveying a single emotion without an actual, like, let's say, like actual acting of the character. Which I understand that it is part of the medium because it's cheaper. It's also a way of playing with the comic book genre. But there were times which, like I said, the writing and the voice acting were like on a high level, but I was thrown off by how it was presented, and especially when we go to the final episode, at this moment when Nolan like is in absolute like fight with himself to what to do with Mark, and you can see on each frame there's a different emotion and all the wrinkles in his head, and I'm like, you see, that I wanted to see in every dramatic conversation that these characters have had so far. So I hope that we see this in the future, because I can see that you guys are able to do it. It is obviously money, which I understand, and obviously it's not something I put it on them, obviously, because I can see they try everything they can with the resources they can use. But I'm not gonna lie that it did throw me off a bit at some moments. But beyond that, whenever I think about the highlights, they are far more than the negative. Because again, the fact that I can only I can pick a handful, like only with my one hand, all the shots or moments that threw me off. It's a very positive thing in an 8 episode season.
I don't know. I think how much money do you want to throw at this? Like, it's already like compared to other.
It's Jeff Bezos. Come on,
but like compared to other superhero animated movies and TV shows, like, come on, this has to be some of the highest animation quality we've ever seen. So, like, the little shortcuts here and there, I'm expecting with all animation, like even in some of the Disney films, like the 3D stuff, you can see some of the shortcuts and stuff like that. So I'm always expecting that. I'm just so impressed with the amount of shortcuts that they didn't take. Do you know what I mean? Like, we spoke about in the DC movies that a lot of like just the general public in the streets and stuff are very stagnant. It doesn't seem like a lively city. Every time we were in
don't have any either.
Oh, they just don't have any.
Yeah.
Every time we were in a populated area, like a city or something in this show, you felt that there were hundreds, thousands of people throughout there, and not just like standing still. They were like moving about, running away from all like the carnage that was going on and stuff. So I thought they did a brilliant job on that with adding those little extra details that you just don't see in most animated shows.
Yeah, think of the Netflix stuff, Stefanos. Like how many cheap like Netflix animations are there? Not counting like Love Robots, whatever.
Love, Death,
Love
and
and Robots.
Yeah. But like you think again of some of the stuff they do like in Castlevania, like that is very like cheap at certain times. So I think that Jake is right in that they do a lot here, which like certain animated shows aren't. But yeah, it would be nice if, and I suppose when you get a second or third season, usually the budget will go up anyway. So that's promising as well.
I agree with Steph. Come on, Bezos, fork out some more money, man. You got plenty. Something that's obviously we've briefly talked about here and there, but is throughout this whole show, I think, is the use of violence. Dave, I'll go to you first. How did you feel as if they used violence in this show? Do you feel it was effective, or did it take you out of it at times?
I wouldn't say it took me out of it. I think that it worked really well in some circumstances, but like we discussed in our discussion about R-rated superhero movies, etc., and especially through like looking at different opinions in preparation for that, I very much have now gone into something like this with a sort of different mentality. So I was very much thinking, well, what does this do to the story? What kind of, how is this add into it, or why are we having it? And sometimes I do have to admit that I feel they was just doing it for the sake of it, or to be kind of like super violent and to be kind of like gory and cool. But again, that's just not my thing. I'm just not like, I don't care if I see, like blood and guts in a like, oh my God, that's awesome kind of way. And we actually recently talked about it. I won't go into that conversation, but, me and Tom were mentioning about Logan recently about like, oh, everyone loves that because it's just so like, an ultra violent version of Wolverine, which again, to me, if I'm just not into that like blood and guts Wolverine, then there's just nothing there's nothing extra for me to be invested for in there. So here, I just felt that there were times in which I was like, I don't really see what this is adding to the story. But on the flip side, I think that there are a lot of times in which it does, especially like the final episode, for example, like when literally Mark is there, like looks like a sack of shit, essentially. Like he's been beaten to an absolute pulp, and like his cheeks all like swollen and his teeth all gone. And he's like, but Dad, and I was like, oh my God, like that is grim. But it works. And also when Nolan kills the Guardians, like that works, because again, you really feel that like, oh my God, what is he doing? Sometimes I felt it was just a bit too much. I was like, do we really need to see, him like literally like rip open a person and that kind of stuff? Especially when they're like, I'm like, I thought these were meant to be the Guardians of the Globe, especially, what was that one who's called like Green something, like Green Ghost, is it? Green Ghost? Like, her power, I was just like, she was completely useless in that fight. I was like, you're supposed to be able to like go through stuff, and she literally did nothing in that fight. It was just used to the purpose of like, oh, I'm just going to rip them open. I was
the one thing she could do, she didn't do, is she got a punch in her face.
Yeah, exactly. So she just caught somebody as well, which I was like, okay, but yeah, so there was times like that where I just didn't know what the purpose of the violence was for. I just felt that it was like overly, like, I know you guys love that episode, and I like it up to a certain point with the Titan stuff. But at the end, again, when that like lion guy is just there, like beating the hell out of Mark, I was just like, I don't really know what this is adding to it. Especially with superhero stuff, I think that it does sometimes take away from that disbelief and the kind of mythical element of stuff when you're making it so realistic and bloody, and especially when you're dealing with characters like Mark and Nolan, who are meant to be invincible characters, but then you're like, but they can also bleed. So it's like Superman. You kind of like, when something touches him, or does, because he's Man of Steel, then it makes sense that he doesn't bleed. But here, when they're bleeding, I'm like, well, I thought they were meant to be invincible, so I don't quite understand how that works. But I'm assuming it's because It's usually when it's something which is like a very, very powerful being like Nolan or that lion guy. Sorry, I don't know his name. So yeah, I just felt that there were certain times in which I was like, this is just going a bit too graphic for me. It's not really serving the story, or there's not real any purpose to it. Whereas again, when it's done in things like The Boys, you've got like a character like Huey there, like, oh, you know, like reacting to it. So you've at least got the reaction there. And because it's a live action show, then you're getting that realistic view of it. And you get like a horrible, gruesome moment, like when, what's her name? Something Claw, when she like crushes that guy with her legs when she's having sex with him. And that's like disgusting, but like again, the boys are watching it and like, oh, and like that's used to tell you like how Compound V is messing up these people, etc. Whereas here, again, I just didn't feel they serviced the story always. The thing it did with the Nolan and Invincible stuff, if you needed to see how badly they were getting hurt by it, but other times I just felt it was done for the sake of it.
I disagree again. I felt it all felt purposeful to the story they were telling and the world they were building within this. Like, I disagree. Like with the Huey thing, you know, you had that reactionary. I felt Mark was that throughout the entire series. Like, I think the most spoken piece of dialogue he says is, "Oh shit." Like he just constantly, because he's constantly like getting his ass handed to him, or just seeing these gruesome things happen around him and blood splatting in his face. He's just like, "Oh fuck, shit! Like, how do I do this?" Like, and it's all about his character growth and him building up to that final fight. You know, I think also something to keep in mind with Invincible is that it was created the same year that Kirkman created The Walking Dead. You know, and given Kirkman's love of horror and zombies, I don't think it should come to any surprise to anyone that Invincible would lean all the way into like graphic content. And me personally, I do think there is an element of taste involved, as you said up top, Dave. And for my taste, I just love that they committed to this visceral imagery in the series. What makes the show and these action scenes so impactful in the style, the framing, the vivid colors, it's just really, really cool, stylish, and retro. Yeah, I just couldn't believe the stuff I was seeing on screen because it was over the top, but it also didn't feel excessive. It wasn't like Deadpool in a way that it was used for comedic effect. It felt proper to the narrative, and I think like most superhero movies and shows tend to shy away from that. And I get what you mean, the whole fantastical, mythological element of that. Again, it's down to taste. My sort of taste with superheroes is that I prefer the grittier, more realistic style of things. So, and I think Kirkman also is as well. So I totally understand why if someone would be hit by someone with super strength, you're going to see a lot of excessive blood come out and guts and all sorts of things. Bodies would literally explode in the most gruesome ways imaginable. So I'm on with that. I do like the epic battle at the end of episode 1 where we get Omni-Man taking down the Guardians. I think like the cross-cutting between the characters that move at super speeds and the ones that don't was so cool to see. I especially like when Red Rush is like pummeling his hands into Omni-Man's chest and he just like ends up with broken hands. I just thought, oh, that's so fucking cool. But at the same time, I'm just like, whoa, what the hell's going on? I was just enthralled with that whole entire sequence. Steph, what are your thoughts on the use of violence? Again, knowing where you came from with the comics, but apparently from what I've heard, that they've said that they've actually doubled the amount of violence that we see in the comics.
Yeah. Here's the thing with violence with me. I am both excited when it happens because that gives more creative freedom, but also I don't like it because on certain people or creatives, they do it a bit too much that it kind of takes it out away from the story, or at least they're trying so hard to make a point that afterwards it gets boring. Here, the majority of the time it's great. The majority, like the fact that the first episode, like the entirety has no violence. Maybe actually it seems very PG-13 stuff until the mid-credit scene, which I imagine for you two and for a lot of other people, that was the moment saying, oh shit, this is not the show I thought I was watching. And which is great. Like me as someone someone who knows all this shit. It's great seeing all these reactions. But to be honest, the problem with violence after a while, especially when it gets very excessive, it comes to the point which I call it the elimination of oh wait, how's it called? I forgot how it's called. I have a name for it. Disrespect of human life, and which after a while, when it happens constantly and constantly, in the end you come out not really caring who dies or what happens, and there are some cases which they do happen. I think for me, I'm one of the very few who was not a big fan of the first season of The Boys. I'm a big fan of the second one, but the first season for me felt very off because of the violence sometimes how it was used. But then I preferred it when it happened in the second season. In this one, even though I was really on point up to possibly even the previous episode in a way. But I do agree that with David when he said that why did Nolan had to kill this person in that certain way? Because that is actually what puts me off. It's not the fact that he kills someone violently, it's the fact that he chooses how violently he will kill each person. Which it doesn't seem, especially knowing in the end, like Nolan is a military person in the end. Why does he have to be so picky to how much of a monster he has to be for each kill, while he could just be methodical in each way, just to be fast with it, which is fine. Again, it's not a huge issue until the final fight, and specifically the train scene, which it kind of reminded me a lot of anime shows which can do the same thing, like extremely explicit, which usually with anime is just for exploitation. Here I understand what was the point for it, but as a means of storytelling, you've made your point. We know why you do this. We know why you act the way you do, and you're always using the same propaganda monologue. Propaganda, by the way, is not gone, and to Mark just to convince him to be on your side. But for me, especially as a comic book reader and who knows everything, I'm not gonna lie. After a while, I was like, just be done with this. Like, I like the action and everything, but just be done. Like, I know what you're saying, which is fine. Which again, I think that's why I actually appreciate the new Guardians for trying to step up and actually starting helping people. I think that was possibly my favorite part with the Guardians in the whole season. The fact that they disobeying Cecil, but not to fight Omni-Man, but going to help people, which I think that will most likely that's going to be their arc over for the next season. And this is kind of like solidifies them as the new Guardians, which I think that I like. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of these violent scenes on regular people, I do like that the aftermath did actually show how staggering and horrible it was for the whole world. And I think that is my way of forgiving what I've seen before, because especially when I know where this is gonna go, if they're always gonna do something like this, after a while, I simply won't. I won't care, but it won't hit the same way.
Yeah, no, I can see what you mean. Personally, I thought like we as the audience were familiar with how Omni-Man was, content against humanity, sort of. Didn't really care about casualties of war. But Mark didn't really understand that. So that's why I thought the excessive violence in that final fight was used so Mark could understand who Omni-Man truly is. And, and it adds further to it when he looks at Mark's mother as nothing more than a pet. Like when he said that, I was like, oh shit. So I think the excessive violence is adding to the character of Omni-Man and making Mark understand who this guy is. And, he's also going on about stuff about, 17 years is nothing in the grand scheme of things. I'll make another kid. But I do think there is a redemptive arc there because, part of Omni-Man does have feelings for Mark, whether he wants to admit it or not, because we get that flashback scene of him, seeing him play baseball and stuff like that. And, he felt genuine joy of watching him grow up. And at the end, we see him fly away where he's crying and stuff like that. And I think those are the elements of this show that just raise the stakes and just raise the series overall above just the carnage. I think anyone can put a bunch of blood and guts on the show, but I think with these little scenes in between the action, the action never neglects any of the heartfelt emotion at the end of this story. So yeah, I didn't have a problem with that at all, and I also I like that they didn't shy away from the amount of casualties in these superheroes things. Again, I know a lot of people have issues with that. A big talking point was like Man of Steel and the amount of destruction that went on there. So I think it's playing on the similar beats. I just think it's whether or not you want to embrace that aspect of seeing so much death of just the common folk and the superheroes not really caring. But like Steph said, I do like that at the end as well. You do get the Teen Titans. That is sort of a little redemptive arc where they go out and start helping people. And I hope we get to see more of that in future seasons. So I do agree with Steph. I don't want to see this all the time for future seasons, but I do feel it does play an important part of this show and what they're trying to say about violence within superheroes.
Yeah, I think the first episode was a good example, is that you've spent that entire episode having a PG-13 episode, and then at the end, then that's because it strikes all the more. So if in some ways, if they hadn't been as violent up to the point of this final episode, or there wasn't as much violence in certain parts of the final episode, it would have hit more when Nolan was trying to make those big messages to Mark. And I think in some ways it's almost like Nolan said, maybe I shouldn't have raised you as a human. And I was watching it yeah, maybe you should have, because that is quite a bad, on hindsight, that, you really didn't prepare him at all for this. What did you expect? And I think that because he hammers his message home so much, I think a bit I agree partly with Steph, that they could have, to me, when Mark plows through that building and he is responsible for all that destruction by literally going through trains and buildings, that to me was oh wow, he's responsible for all this and he can see everything that's happening. But then for Nolan to just keep doing it, I was like Steph, I was a bit okay, we get it. But I also understood from Nolan's point of view that he was just why does he not understand? So I appreciated both levels of it. So I think it's like we're saying, it's about taste, but also just getting that balance right and just what you like in your content. But I think it is difficult when we're talking about characters like Deadpool, etc., or even like I like a lot of the, Kick-Ass and Kingsman stuff. Some of it is just for glorifying violence sake and exploiting it. Sometimes it's done for character, with someone like Hit Girl or someone who's raised as an assassin and she's literally got blades. So it's like Deadpool. You understand, oh yeah, they're slicing them open because they've literally got a katana blade. Whereas, like we said here with Nolan, it's why does he need to rip somebody in half, etc.? He can just punch through somebody and just stop their heart or something. Why do we need to have all these graphic, cool deaths all the time? And it's kind of going back to what Jake said about, it's that horror element. To me, it makes sense when we're in a horror environment, or we're in a more supernatural environment. But here, again, if you're dealing with more Superman type characters, it's just a bit more of a weird blend, which I think sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. It just would be nice if they were a bit restrained. I think a good example is in the episode with the robot cyborg people. I just was kind of why is this here? Do we really need to go this graphic with it? Yeah, I get it, but it's just a bit too, I just didn't see what service that give to the story or to the, yeah, it made it more grim for the characters, especially Mark's best friend, losing his boyfriend like that. It made that more horrible. But apart from that, it just came across as ugh, it wasn't doing what we were getting from the Nolan and Mark stuff and sort of adding to the story. But yeah, it's really difficult because it's such a balance of taste and, story and all that kind of stuff.
You're doing this for nothing. Being a part of the Empire will make Earth better than it ever was.
And what if they resist?
That's why we're here. To keep them from resisting. To show them how wrong they are. How pointless it is. That they can be a part of something bigger. Or die.
I won't let you.
You want to die for this planet? Fine! What's 17 more years? I can always start again. Make another kid.
All right, to see us out then, Dave, I'll go with you first, and then Steph, you can close us out. But what are your sort of expectations for future seasons? Because they have announced season 2 and 3. That's coming down the pipeline. And your final thoughts on this season?
I think it's hard for me to say, like, this is what I want them to change or this is what I want them to do. Because, again, it's not one of those shows in which, like I said, even though we've had many times in which Jake is like, I disagree. But, again, I'm not talking about any of these as, like, I think this is a major problem with the show. And this is why this show is not working. It's not good. It's just, again, some of it just doesn't gel with me. And I think it's interesting for a lot of it, I think, because, you're dealing with, like, what Nolan wanted to do. Again, it's that very much like the kind of like a Thanos mentality, and you're dealing a lot with Nazism of like, this is bad, this idea of like only like the pure people should be left and the strongest will survive and all that kind of stuff. So I think for me, I was kind of like, oh, it's too bad we sort of like built up to this all season long. So I would like to see a lot more of that from obviously what Steph's saying in terms of like morality and that kind of stuff. I'm assuming we'll get a lot more of that. There's obviously that element of like, if Superman was evil kind of stuff, which again, I can't say like, oh, I want less of that. It's just that, as I've said before, that's just not my bag. I'm not interested in that as a storyline, which Jake has often said, he's very interested in. But I am interested in the more Invincible side of like the coming of age story, becoming a hero. And I think that it is interesting that, he's having to juggle this stuff. And I'm glad that they had like, Amber, for example, go, oh yeah, I know you're invincible, but do you think I'm dumb? And, so these shows are starting to become, it's very hard to do secret identity stuff these days at all, because it is just so unbelievable, and we've had so much comic book content. So thankfully, these shows are sort of recognizing that. So I just hope that they keep doing that. Obviously, I hope that maybe some of the cast sort of tone it down a bit, and maybe they sort of lighten up on the celebrity cameos, if we want to call it that. And Jason Mantzoukas sort of changes things up a bit. But yeah, I think for me, even if it carries on much the same way, I'll still watch it, still enjoy it for what it is. And I'm not expecting this to change. It's just, I can't expect the show to sort of tailor exactly to me, because I can still see that it's giving people all these elements that Jake is really into and the comic book fans really like. So it's obviously doing its job, doing its purpose. It's really well reviewed. It's just that some stuff to me doesn't quite gel. So I think mainly I just want to see them sort of move away from the kind of like self-parody kind of stuff and the kind of like sort of the world building as much in terms of like, here's all these characters. And like, also I'm not a big fan of like when they keep having like episodes being like cliffhanger, oh, whoa, look at this guy. Who is this guy? Oh, he's now the head of this. I was like, I'm not interested in this. I don't care. I was like, I just want to know about the Nolan stuff, I think. So again, I hope they stick to one storyline and sort of like really nail that, rather than just having like random escapade with, the robot people as we got in that university episode. I just want them to sort of stick to the main storyline. I want to see more from Eve. I think that her storyline is really interesting. And I think, again, a character like Atom Eve, who I think her power set's really interesting. And that's why I didn't like when they just crap on her by being like, oh, yeah, you duplicate. And I was like, this girl can change, like, the fabric of reality. Can we not, like, use her a bit more in the field? Because she can literally, like, create things at will. So I'd like to see more from Atom Eve.
That's fair enough. I have very little criticisms about this show, so all I will say is a lot of it is just keep doing what you're doing because you're pleasing me. I feel as if this show was made for me. The only thing I will say that I want improvement on is, while I enjoy all the little subplots between the supporting characters, I do enjoy them. I just wish they were a bit more elevated on par with the Mark and Nolan stuff. Unlike you, Dave, I don't want them to get rid of that. I want them to dive a bit more into that, but just elevate it a bit more so it's as interesting as the Mark Nolan and Debbie stuff. But when I look back at this season, I feel as if it's incredible how many life-changing experiences like Mark went through over only 8 episodes, and I feel they've done an incredible job of fleshing this world out with so many amazing characters. The plot and story is always moving forward. The characters are always evolving in interesting ways. I think the pacing flows unbelievably well. The characters are engaging, interesting, layered from the very beginning. It has humor, dramatic weights. I love the action. It's just gory, bloody fun. And a cast that just absolutely kills it every single line. I know you might have some disagreements with Jason Mantzoukas, but hey, like I said, I wasn't having much of an issue with him. And I just think it perfectly captures like this exhilarating highs of being a superhero, but also perfectly demonstrating the horror of seeing people you love and care about die in front of you. And I just think this is a perfect medium to express this sort of form of animation. So, yeah, top marks for me. I absolutely love this show. I can't wait for future seasons. But, Steph, what are your sort of closing thoughts on this show?
I can say that both of you, in some cases, are correct, and some where you were very wrong. I'm not gonna say which is which, but here's what I'm gonna say, because I know what's gonna come, and it's so fucking crazy. Like you thought that this season had some life-changing moments. No, 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 no. And there's a reason why they renewed it for season 2 and 3, because those 2 seasons have huge shit that's gonna happen. And based on how they did the first season, of how condensed it became, that it basically took 2 years and made it into 8 months, I can see where they're going with this. So based on what I know, and basing this, what I would like to maybe change a bit, but far more because of I see what they are capable of, is do more human stuff, do more depth and gravity into the human elements. Like I said, I love that we're dealing with Amber, make her more important, especially now that she knows who Mark is, make her part of the overall story. Eve the same way, or I hope there are going to be some changes on her too, that she becomes more of an official protector of Earth. I would like to see that from her. Also, more William. We didn't mention William a lot, but I think he's a great part of Mark's family. And I think we need that, especially now with Nolan being gone. Mark needs to have a more important connection with the remaining family members he has left with. And also I want to say that Debbie does, at this point, she kind of becomes a bit of a lesser character in the comics. So please keep her in, make her vital. And I'm not only talking because I have a Korean mother, and yes, I have a huge emotional connection with her. So, but I do truly believe that she gives more to Mark. And even when Mark was saying to Nolan about, talking about his mother, that of course he would die for the humanity, based on his relationship with his mother, I believe it. And I think we need to put more of that in there. And like you both said, yes, make all the subplots more vital to the overall story. Because I did feel midway through a bit of a stale reaction from me, especially for the Martians, which, but to be honest, it was never one of my favorite parts in the comics. But I do hope we're going to see more of the world. And now we're going to have the coalition of planets, which I'm really excited, because this is one of the craziest shit we're going to see. But overall, keep it grounded. Even when you go out to outer space, make it relatable. And yeah, and give Bezos, give more money, please.
He's got plenty to spare. I'm sure he can.
Yeah, it says he shouldn't get married anytime soon.
Yeah, I keep saying he's Lex Luthor. People have pointed out online. He's got plenty of money.
Oh yeah. All right. Thank you, Steph, for coming back on the show. It's always a pleasure to talk to you about Cape shit. And thank everyone for listening to this episode. Again, we always appreciate people coming on board every week, listening to us geek out about all this wonderful content that we're getting. So, Steph, where can the people find you on the socials and what you're getting up to?
You can find me the same place you can find Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos on Twitter at SY Florakis, and which you could also find a link on my letterbox, which I review or make small comments on each film I watch in the year. Actually, I watched yesterday Mitchell's vs. the Machine, which I already talked to the guys about it. So I absolutely love it. And talking about good animation content, I think that is a great example by the film medium. Although it is family friendly, and as we always said, we kind of prefer the more adult stuff. I do think it's probably one of the best family animated content out there. And also, you can find me on Fresh Take Hub, where last week I did an article for my prediction for the Oscars. I was right in some, I was wrong in others, and I really hate me for it. But it's a laugh. Just read about it and just make fun of me on Twitter. It's absolutely fine. And also, I was part as a guest on Well Good Movies, where we talked more about the Oscars and some of our favorite moments in the ceremony the last 10 years.
Yeah, check all that out, guys. Dave, how about yourself?
Similar with me. You can catch me on Well Good Movies with Steph when we were talking about our favorite Oscar highlights from the past 10 years and some of our standout Oscar snubs, reviewing the ceremony that happened this year as well. So that is a really fun episode. Go check that out. You can just listen to us talk about sort of celebratory moments and me sort of just laughing at Adele's Zeme, like loving that moment in history. You can catch me also on Twitter at David Oscar, so you can keep up with all the stuff that I'm doing in regards to writing and video making over there, and my letterbox where you can catch. I do try to keep it as my log of films. So if I ever want to go back to stuff and sort of remember what I thought of it, I usually write up a small review on there, unless I'm reviewing something like the 50 Shades films, in which I just take the piss. But usually I keep it serious. So if I'm not reviewing films on there, I'm usually watching some sort of television or something as well. So at the moment, going through quite a few series, especially now Invincible and Falcon and Winter Soldier have ended. There'll be a lot more time to start some new stuff.
Yeah, well, we got the Bad Batch around the corner, so keep an eye out for mine and Dave's other podcast, The Mondaylorians, as, yes, we will be taking a break from Marvel, but it won't be a break for us, as we'll be over there talking about the Bad Batch. And as for myself, you can also catch me on Twitter at Sweaty Jake, and you also can catch me on Letterboxd as well at Jake Hart. That's Jake. That's Hart. And as for the show, we'll be continuing doing our weekly shows of discussions and new shows. And we've also got a couple of reviews coming up of some Jupiter's Legacy. And in the summer, we'll be getting Loki and Black Widow. So plenty of exciting stuff to keep tuned into Capes, Cows and Masks. And you can also find us on Twitter at Capes, Cows and Masks. And we're also on Facebook at Capes, Cows and Masks. And whether you're using Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever, subscribe, follow us, like us, share us, rate us, leave a review. It all helps us go up in the rankings. And the best thing you can do is recommend us to all your geeky and nerdy friends to be listening to this show. So thank you for listening. We'll see you all very soon. Stay safe, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, shit.